with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, thank you for checking in Practical Wisdom for Leaders. I have Jim Vaselopoulos, and he is a C-level business advisor and executive coach with a proven record as a leader, strategist, rainmaker, and expert in new business development. With his principled leadership, visionary approach, and effective execution, Jim has successfully established new companies and transformed underperforming organizations. Jim is also the author of Clarity, Business Wisdom to Work Less and Achieve More. He has a podcast, and it's called The Leadership Podcast. So he is in the right place. And you know what? The full bio is going to be in the show notes. Jim, I am excited for this conversation. Podcaster to podcaster, passionate about leadership person to passionate about leadership person. So we're going to see where the conversation takes us today. But what else do people need to know about you that maybe wasn't in that quick bio? What do you think, sir?
First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's always a joy. It's always fun. And I know in our prior conversations, we just have a good time talking about stuff like that. You know, I think the most important thing about me is I'm a dad, a brother, husband. More than anything, it's just family and my Greek heritage and my upbringing are really important to me. I think that formed a lot of my mentality, and I'm just thankful and grateful for the foundation that was put in place. And I just want to make sure that I was super fortunate and I can pass down some of what was passed on to me. And that's, really what drives a lot of what I do today.
That's awesome. Your Greek heritage, my gosh, we had as a family just an incredible couple weeks about 2 summers ago. We were in Athens, we were in Naupaktos, we were in Zakynthos, we were in, Meteora. Kind of beautiful. Jumped around the country a little bit and tried to spend a little bit of time in each spot. But anytime we say to our children, favorite trip ever, it's Greece. And they say, here's the words, they say, those blues.
Yeah. It's the visuals are great. The colors are fantastic. The people are warm and friendly and the food is off the charts. Yeah.
And that's what I say to folks. I'm like, look, you can get an incredible meal for like €55 with a bottle of wine. The history, our kids love Greek mythology. So it was hilarious. We were walking around Athens with an archaeologist and he's telling stories and our girls were like, oh, and I can't even name the gods, like Zeus. Yeah. Oh, he did this to Mithra and blah, 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 blah. It was It was so awesome. So you've got the history, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So just an incredible time. Well, that's not why we're here today to discuss Greece. That's a different podcast. But oh my gosh, I could talk about it. So you're talking with folks every week, just like I'm talking with folks every week. And I think what I love about this conversation is that we get to pick your brain a little bit and hear about what's on your radar. What are the hot topics for folks that you're speaking with? What's top of mind for them? What are you seeing right now?
Every business is a little bit different. Every business is in a different phase and kind of their cycle and their growth and their establishment. So people run in with different things. I think as leadership guys, we always know that difficult conversations are tough to have. People usually don't fully commit to really getting through the issue at hand. They kind of always back off and wimp out a little bit. And, it's like, no, you really can't do that. And I think that is something that we're always helping people with, regardless of what it is. But some of the things that I think I help people with most is trying to get clarity on something, to just kind of say, let's strip away what's not important right now and really focus on what is important. And then I think another element that I think is easier sometimes for a third party or a coach or someone like myself to help with is to kind of sequence of events, to say, listen, all these things you're talking about are really important. Let's put this one at the top of the list. And here's why. And here's why we should be patient on some of these other issues. So sequencing, timing, and patience, I think, are the things that are hard for us as individuals to see when we're in the storm. And it's easier for someone else to see. And so I think being clear helps you be able to understand the proper sequencing, timing, and to be able to be patient when there's a lot going on. And I think, if there's a common theme today, there's just a lot going on, right?
Yes. In your book, Clarity, and for listeners, we're going to have links in the show notes. And so you'll be able to access this. Now, you tell this beautiful story about your father in the very, very beginning, but then you talk about organizations. And it's the symptoms. You come in and we've got things like accountability, agency, expectations, alignment, being too busy, conflict, culture, turnover and retention, profitability, growth. Those are the things that people bring you in to talk about. And those are some of the symptoms that probably some of what you just said isn't in alignment.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, I didn't write a book because I feel like I need to write a book. It's like, anytime I get into something and I start repeating myself a lot, I'm like, I should probably take this as a cue. This is a pattern, and I want to kind of codify this pattern. And so these were the things that people were running into trouble with the most, the things that I know that I struggled with in my career at different points with different companies. And I think when we talk about, let's say, getting that clarity, we're always trying to strip away. And I think there's a reason why I follow this process of saying, here are the things that are symptoms. I'm not saying they're not important, okay? Yeah. If you have a fever is important to take care of. If you have left arm pain, that's something you should probably look into pretty quick, okay? But it's not really the core problem. You may be having the onset of a heart attack, or you may be having the onset of the flu or COVID or something like that. The underlying condition is deeper. And I think a lot of times we recognize that with ourselves with health problems. And so we say oh, okay, treat the symptoms, or, sometimes we ignore the symptoms. But in business, we usually take action on the symptoms and then think we're done. I'm always really trying to push people to be a little bit more curious. As an outsider, it's easier for me to ask questions and to dig a little bit deeper. So let's get down to the root cause or the true underlying issue that is at hand so that we can really make a lasting impact. Otherwise, you're just perennially treating symptoms. You're taking another aspirin, you're taking another pill for this or that. It's like, maybe diet and exercise are the solution. And well, I don't want to hear that. Well, it's what you need to hear.
Take us on a story about that, okay? So you walk in, and I know you've got some stories and some characters and case studies throughout the book, which are great because you follow some of these individuals. But let's talk a little bit about that. How does it work when you encounter this? You see these symptoms, but people, again, are focused kind of on those symptoms. And take me through that process with some of your clients. I'm just really interested in knowing this.
I think there's these kind of stories we have in the book about these fictional characters, and they're kind of an amalgam of personal experiences and things like that. But, one of the characters, the heroine of the story, because there's a heroine that's a thread through the book, there's a lot from a particular client of mine, and she knows who she is. And she's an amazing woman, and I love her to death. When we first started working together, it was like many clients I work with, it's like just whack-a-mole, dealing with this problem. And as soon as you take care of that one, another one pops up and another one pops up. It was like, oh my gosh, people are quitting. We got to deal with that. Oh my gosh, now we have like money issues because we're paying everyone a bunch of money. Oh my gosh, we've got people who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I'm having trouble with accountability and I'm paying a lot of money. And, it's just one after another. It finally came down to, okay, let's stop playing whack-a-mole with the symptoms. Let's get down to what is the root cause. And part of it was she, as an individual, needed to re-engage as a leader instead of just letting other people do all the leading for her. It was her presence and her imposing her desire and her will on the organization with a little bit more force than just saying like, I've explained it to you. Why do you not get it? And I think that was like the turning point, because once we got to that and she decided to engage, her problems started just evaporating because they weren't really the problems. They were the symptoms. So if, let's say, I have left arm pain, I lower my heart rate, I do whatever the Apple Watch tells me to do, it doesn't mean my heart's healthy. But if I go in and I say, listen, the root cause is, hey, you need to eat better, you need to lower your cholesterol, you need to do all these other things because your heart needs to be healthier. Let's get a healthier heart. So we're going to exercise, we're going to build your cardiovascular strength, we're going to eat better, and we're going to maybe do something to lower our cholesterol. These symptoms tend to dissipate because I've dealt with the core issue. And the core issue in that case was really re-engaging forcefully, not in a dictatorial way, but just asserting presence and asserting will. And these symptoms dissipated. And it was a miraculous kind of transformation of the organization. You know, I think that happens more often than not when people don't get sidetracked by the symptoms and playing whack-a-mole. So if you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole, you're not digging deep enough. You're not curious enough about what the real root cause is.
Well, and at times also you're part of the problem, right? Leadership is such a beautiful mirror, like parenting is a beautiful mirror, where it's very easy for an incident to occur, me to externalize and blame other. They're not, they didn't, they won't, they can't, I said. But it's very, very, very difficult for us to look inward and say, okay, what do I own in this? I'm a little bit of a whirling dervish. I haven't put systems in place. I'm not rigid with having a weekly meeting where we actually go through our KPIs or go through our objectives or really revisit and in the meeting hold people accountable. And so you start to kind of like unearth some of what that individual, if they're open to it. And I imagine something she discovered was that she was in some ways part of the problem.
100%. Let's just be a little bit scientific about this. What's the common denominator here? Like, none of my people are accountable. It's like, all right,
Okay.
Well, you know, are they all at fault? Or maybe there's, you know, let's do a little Pareto chart here. There's something that's rising to the top here.
Let's do a fishbone analysis and figure this out. Oh, yeah, because, and it's interesting too, how the human being will play. I had a guest on, his name's Robert Livingston, and he had this quote, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said something to the effect of, when it comes to mental gymnastics, most of us are Olympians. Okay.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then what I hear sometimes in organizations is, oh, I just can't stand Gen Zs. They don't want to work. And so to take myself psychologically off the hook, I will blame literally entire generations of people. So that I don't have to kind of look in the mirror and say, what could I potentially own in some of this? And again, I'm not speaking from a place of, oh, I have this all figured out. It's just an interesting dynamic that I bump into often.
We're so fallible in the way we like to get like the answer. Okay. What is the recipe? How do you do this? And there are countless articles that are on LinkedIn every day and on Facebook about like, here are the 3 things you need to do. Here are the 5 things you need to do. And the reality is what they always leave out is, what's the context?
Yeah.
Okay. For whom? In what situation? Everyone is different. And a great leader has a lot of gears. They know, you know, how to motivate particular people and who needs maybe a little bit of tough love now and then, who needs a little bit more support and time to develop. And that is the kind of thing that can't be written down into an article. It's like, here's how to be a great leader. In different circumstances at different times, based on what the conditions are and who the people involved are, you need to be a different person. So being very adaptable, it's one thing to be adaptable. It's another thing to know what form to take and what moment. So you need to really listen carefully so that you can understand the situation. And I always talk about this, like, you got to maintain balance. You know, balance is not something you like, I read this article, now I'm a leader, and if I follow these 3 things, it's good. It's like, balance is a state that you can achieve, but it requires tremendous work and feedback to maintain. Yes. If you don't have, let's say, the feedback, you can't maintain your balance. And so I think that's what everyone forgets, is that, you know, if I'm going down a hill fast, it's easier to maintain balance than if I'm like maybe going up a slope on a bike and I've lost some speed. I need to manage my balance differently. Leadership's the same way. Sometimes I need to coalesce around an idea and maybe not have as much divergent thought. Sometimes I need to have lots of divergent thought. It's never like, this is the right amount all the time.
Yes.
It's like driving your car in third gear all the time. It's hard to start and it's hard to go fast.
Yeah.
You can make it work. It's not really effective.
Yeah, there's this scholar, Barbara Kellerman. She was at Harvard and Kennedy School, and she calls it her leadership system. That it's, kind of a relationship with leaders, followers, context. So you brought up context, critical element, and there's just an infinite number of variables in those three things that I just mentioned. So, a leader, are you skilled at, to your point, staying present, being mindful, understanding your options, balancing some of these polarities or dichotomies or paradoxes, we could say, because in certain situations, you may be overly empathetic and actually part of the problem because you're not holding people accountable. In other situations, you may be leaning too hard on accountability and lacking empathy, and that's why you're losing people. But the infinite number of elements that are required of a great leader, put on top of that the expertise around the business, whatever that entails as far as where they're headed as an organization in that front. So it really is Herculean when you think of, and especially with oftentimes no training or low levels of training, right? Especially when it comes to the leadership piece of it. People aren't walking in experts in all of these different facets of leadership, skilled in inspiring a team, building a team, holding people accountable, difficult conversations. What leadership style should I use in this moment? Oh, I should be a little more democratic, but not too democratic. How do I create psychological safety so the team talks?
What's fascinating to me is we learn by mimicking at a very young age. And one of the interesting things about the pandemic is they said with younger children that couldn't see their parents' lips, they really had a deficiency in learning how to speak and things like that. They delayed responses in those regards. We mimic what we see and observe, just like you are what you eat. In many ways, we are what we observe.
Oh, yeah.
And so let's take a look at, as a society, what we're observing. Let's take a look at, let's say, is there any really good leadership lessons being learned in a show like Survivor? I'm not saying it's bad television or it's not entertaining, but that is really not the way to be a great leader, okay? But that's what we absorb. And so that's what people buy into. But there's no police officer whose life looks like what it is on TV, okay? You talk to any police officer, there's lots of paperwork. There's no lawyer that spends that amount of time not in front of a computer and in the courtroom, okay? Yeah. There's very few doctors that live that kind of glamorous life. And I think a lot of people have such a terrible view of salespeople because, they always get such a bad rap on TV and stuff like that. The used car salesman. It's not to say that there aren't terrible salespeople out there.
Let's go 5% of any profession.
Yeah.
Probably ruining it for the other 95.
Exactly. But what are we ingesting and what is giving us false sense of understanding of what's going on? And what do we end up mimicking? And which is why I often see people who have, because leadership training, there aren't many people who do that. But let's just take a look at something where you can take a course on, let's say, negotiating. Most people never take a course in negotiating. So when they go into a negotiation, like for the first time, or even if they're experienced, they have no idea what to do. And they mimic stuff they see on TV. Okay. And then it's just a train wreck because that's the only thing that they've been exposed to. We kind of are what we consume, which is why we often say leaders are readers, right? What are you consuming? And if you really haven't consumed anything, are you thinking that leadership always has to be George Patton leading a column of tanks into battle? Sometimes maybe, but not all the time. And I think that's the fallacy of how we screw ourselves up by ingesting too many bad models.
Even some of the books that we can ingest. Okay, I'm going to pick on a book right now that I actually respect in many ways. I'm going to go with the book by Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership. I'm listening to this and I was listening to it. So it's like Batman's reading you a story. It was great. And I have insane levels of respect for what he did. But I thought, oh my gosh, I can just see manufacturing floors and departments in small businesses throughout the country and the world where people are going out and trying to be, I'm an extreme ownership guy, and that's the culture I'm going to try and yell. And so what I really respected about Jocko and Babin was that in their second book, Dichotomies, have you read it?
I haven't read that one yet. No.
It's good. What I really respect about them is that beginning of that book, they're like, look, sometimes when what you write goes out into the world, you learn. And what we learned was that this extreme ownership can be taken to an extreme as well.
Mhm.
So that is all about these dichotomies, right? And so they go through these different dichotomies. We could call them polarities. We could call them tensions, two ends of the same spectrum, leadership and management, or empathy and accountability. So he says, look, we got to balance these things, and we need to be paying close attention, as you said, to what's appropriate for the situation. Sometimes we need to move the needle a little bit and swing a little less hard, or
Mhm.
pay closer attention to this side of the coin, so to speak. So I really, really appreciated it. But yeah, you have John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws. Again, some really good stuff in there. A lot of kind of face validity as far as, and 21 irrefutable. I don't know.
That's a strong statement. But,
That's
what I've found, because I've been doing the podcast for a long time,
yeah.
that stuff sells.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. Right. I was just going to say it's marketing more than it is,
Yeah, I agree. Through all the years we've been doing the podcast, Jan and I, we've had so many people on the show, and some of the people like the best minds on leadership
Yeah.
have the least amount of exposure externally. Okay. Wow, this person really gets it. They're amazing. They're a great leader. If I didn't have my own company, I'd quit and work for them tomorrow. Yeah. Just like, wow, I want to follow them. Their business suffers because they're unwilling to take extreme positions because they realize you just can't be that way. That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Then there are other people who have a fraction of the understanding or the true leadership mentality, but yet what they say and how they say it is so compelling and extreme and controversial that it's like, hey, and I think that is, one of these societal problems we're wrestling with right now is in the din of all this messaging that's going out there. For you to be heard, you have to ring your dinner bell loud. Okay. Yeah. And so you can't just be like vanilla. You need to say something so extreme that it's just like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And people go like, oh, wow, let's all do that. And it's like, no, that's just too extreme. I mean, it's like the diet fad. You should eliminate all of this except for kale from your diet. It's like, we always look at the people that live to be, 100 and 105 and stuff like that. And they eat tons of stuff that people tell you not to eat. They just do it all in moderation. It's like balance. It gets back to this common sense stuff.
Yeah. Back to the blue zones, back to Greece.
Yeah, full circle.
It's an interesting space. And again, so even when someone is leaders or readers, lifelong learning, what we're consuming is important. I really, really enjoy Jocko's books. I enjoy Simon Sinek. I just recently finished a couple others that quote unquote would be a little bit lighter, kind of more of like an N of one type story. Mm-hmm. But it's good. It's really good. And at times it's not sharing the whole story or getting to the level of complexity and that's hard. That's really hard with this topic. It just is. And so that's something I've been reflecting on a lot is what's the right level? And because top of the funnel, yeah, John Maxwell book can be great. But is Maxwell now going to take them on a journey where they get a little more complex in their thinking so that they can be set up to be successful? Because if we present it as it's just simple and easy, and these are the 21 irrefutable laws, know these and you're good, I think we're also setting that person up to not do well, potentially.
I remember in college, okay, and I was getting an engineering degree, and it was quite a struggle for me. But I was always jealous because the professor would talk about like these equations and all this other stuff, and like it was hard. And there would be people like he'd be saying something in class, and I knew the equation we were talking about. And he'd say, what happens if you increase the pressure over here? And there's like a few kids at the beginning of the class who were like, oh my God, because they knew what happened, because they understood the equation. And I was just like, I don't know, give me some numbers. I'll punch it in and I'll tell you what happens, because I don't understand how this works yet, but I know the equation to use. Yeah. And so literally, if you want someone designing bridges and systems in your world, you want the people who were at the front of the class. You did not want me. Because I was dangerous enough to be able to use the equation, but I didn't understand fully. When we throw out like the 21 irrefutable laws or the 5 maxims for this or the, whatever it is, okay? And you're just like playing the game, plugging numbers into the equation. Sometimes we create people who are more dangerous than useful. And so you have to get that deep understanding. Reading a lot of different people is important. And I think one of the areas where I'd like to see people read more is not just on the pragmatic or practical portion of leadership, but it's the philosophical underpinnings. And I think a lot of times when you have a value system and you have philosophical underpinnings, and I don't care whether it's Eastern philosophy or Western philosophy, to study a little bit about philosophy, because that's the stuff that doesn't change. When we talk about things that are irrefutable, I think let's talk about, let's say, the philosophical underpinnings of what it means to be a good person, what it means to live a good life, what it means to have integrity. And I think when we talk about things that are irrefutable, like those are the things that probably matter most in your value system. And they're not necessarily in a lot of the leadership dialogue today.
Yeah. That's why I'm kind of amazed at who's our friend who's really made Stoicism so sexy. Ryan
Holiday. Ryan Holiday.
Yeah. He's just made it like just taken that kind of out of the dirt and made it just really the coolest thing in the world, and which is great. I think it's awesome as well. But yeah, oftentimes that's not the sexy stuff. It's not flashy. It's not. And to your point, that's some of the timeless wisdom, whether it's from some of the faiths, whether it's from some of the philosophers. Mm-hmm. And then I think another challenge we have at times, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I mean, at times there's an overly rosy kind of picture painted of leadership, and it's chocolate bars and warm fuzzies and tulips. At times you have to consider the work of Machiavelli, or your people will die, or your family will die, or you'll be taken advantage of. And so there's this kind of bent towards, it's always empathetic leadership, or it's always compassionate leadership, it's always authentic leadership. And I understand that, and I agree with that. And I think we have to have an appreciation for the spectrum, because you're going to come across someone who is not of that mindset. And in some cases, they might be building some of the most valuable organizations in the world, have a very different mindset than what we write about in the literature, right? Musk is not interested in compassionate and empathetic leadership. And so that's a thing. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to know that. And we have to explore some of that side of the work as well, because I think we do a disservice by not exploring some of that spectrum.
Well, I think like our modern day Machiavelli in literature today and probably thinking is Jeff Pfeffer out of Stanford. I think when he takes a look at the way he approaches things, he says, hey, your number one job as a leader is to maintain power. Because if you maintain power, you can't continue to be a leader. And so that sounds so evil and bad. And there are people who have co-opted that idea, whether it's from Machiavelli or not, to do horrible things. Okay. So let's not just say across the board, but I think you can't undermine the logical nature of that thought process to say, listen, you can't go in there and just be a martyr and just like, well, I lost power. I guess we lost. It's like, no, I mean, we really want to do things for the right reasons and for the good of society or the good of the people that I have a fiduciary responsibility to. That is an important element. The other aspect that I think is really fascinating is, I'll never forget when I was young and early in my career, I had such a disdain for upper management. I thought they were like so stupid at times, and then maybe there were instances where they were. But, as I climbed the ladder and I got into a position of authority and power, I started to realize, okay, there's always information I didn't have. And it never became more real to me when I had a bunch of employees and I was a partner in a firm and we were talking about some employee that was let go and everyone was all upset about it because I can't believe they let him go and this and that. And it's like, if you knew the details, you'd be like, wow, can't believe that person stayed around for so long. Okay?
Thankfully, they're gone.
But you can't share those details because those are the kinds of things that are protected by HR and things, and other laws. And so seek to understand, I think, is the great philosophical construct. Because if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, seek to understand and open your mind to possibilities that there may be information you do not have. And I think that is one of these ills that plague society today, because people are seeking to retort, seeking to criticize instead of to understand. And I think if we just spent a little more time seeking to understand, we'd be in a better place, and having an open mind to say, maybe there's something here I don't understand. And I think especially with very complicated, complex problems, it's nice when they're simple. They're never simple. There's always something that you didn't consider. There's a third level to the chessboard that may not be visible to you.
Let's just go is not visible to you. For the fourth
Yes.
level, at least, isn't visible to you. There's
Yeah.
a level.
Yeah. And I was the guy who didn't understand how the equation works. So it's just, wow. I wish I had that deep understanding.
Jim, as we begin to wind down our time together, is there anything else that you've been pondering or thinking about? Maybe it's been conversations on the podcast, maybe not, but what's been keeping your mind cooking lately as you exist in this space?
It's an interesting question because I just started kind of work on what I think will be my next book. The process makes you think better. And I like the fact that it forces you to clarify your thinking and really be sharp with your mental approach on things. And so really what is keeping me busy is the concept of intentionality. And that'll be the next book, intentionality. Because I think once you have some clarity, you can then be intentional. But what does it mean to be intentional, and where should you be intentional? I think those are things that really allow people to focus their scarce resources. And our scarce resources as humans are time, energy, to some degree, money. Where are we going to put our scarce resources for the maximum impact so that we can have a fulfilling life, so we can have an impact in the right places for the people who either we lead or the people we care about? That's what's keeping me busy, and it's a good problem to think about.
I love that word almost as much as I like the word curiosity. But intentionality, wow, that'd be so cool, man, that you wrote the book Clarity and then the book Intentionality. Boom.
It might be intentional. How about that?
No, but I mean, I just love that word because it requires forethought. It requires some level of wisdom. It requires education. It requires experience. There's intentionality in how I'm proceeding. Back to what you said 25 minutes ago in the conversation. Is there forethought and consideration? And is there a presence in my decision making about how to move forward? When I'm not getting the results that I want, am I going through the filter of what do I own in this first? That's for me kind of intentionality. And there's a process there that helps someone guide themselves through some of that.
Here's a funny thing, like people hire leadership coaches and folks like us because they have someone, they say, this person needs executive presence. Okay. And that's always like one of these things, like you got to help this person with their executive presence. That's fine. I don't have a problem helping people with that. But I say like, that's like the kind of stuff most people focus on is the candy coating. I need you to look the part. I need you to speak the part, stand taller, do all this, do all that. The real bone structure beneath all that is if you are clear-minded and you act with intention, you could be wearing a hoodie and it wouldn't matter. Okay. You could speak with a Southern drawl and it wouldn't matter. Okay. Because if you have clarity and you act with intention, people are going to see something. That is presence. Okay. Yeah. So these are kind of the root foundational elements of really being able to lead people. It's not to say that it's easier if you have the nice candy coating. Okay. But the candy coating alone without the bone structure beneath it is a little bit hollow and inauthentic.
Yep. 100%. And that kind of structure could then also be the person's value system. It's just that foundation there. And yeah. Okay. I always end the podcast by asking guests what they've been listening to, streaming, reading, what's caught your attention. It could be this latest season of Survivor.
It is not.
It could be something else that's caught your attention recently. Although, Jim, it would be fun to see you on Survivor, right? The leadership expert navigating Survivor.
I'd be terrible. I'd be terrible.
You'd get on the show. You just need to say, look, I've been studying leadership for 27 years. I'm awesome at it. They'd be like,
I'd be the first week out. I wouldn't make it 1 week just because I just don't play games anymore. My kids would be so disappointed in me.
They'd be so, well, you'd have to come back and for 15 weeks, keep the secrets, and every week they just watch you fail a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's how it'd be with me in those physical challenges. You couldn't stand on the pole, Dad?
I know where I stand.
Yeah. So what's caught your attention? What have you been reading, listening to, streaming? What might listeners be interested in?
One of the people I enjoy listening to every morning is Peter Zion. He's a geopolitical strategist. I really enjoy his viewpoints on things. I wouldn't say I'm a disciple. There are sometimes when I'm like, I'm not sure you're right, but he's a good thinker. Yeah. And I like the way he thinks. And so I'm a big passionate believer in like, how do other people think? And another person who thinks in an interesting way is like Huberman. He thinks in an interesting way. And I'm not saying like I support everything these people say, but I think another person who thinks in very interesting ways that I think is clear and clean and precise is like a Jordan Peterson. I think he's interesting. And I think sometimes he's just, okay, I see how you got to where you were going. And I think there's a complexity and a simplicity to the way he does it, which I think is interesting to watch. And so there are all kinds of people that do stuff. I'm always reading books to get ready for podcasts. And I'm always interested in books that kind of get you to rethink paradigms that we've fallen into. Yeah. And I think there's a book recently, Leslie Zane wrote it. We had her on the podcast. I forget the name of her book. I really feel bad about that right now. Her concept was a fallacy we have in marketing where we've always been told for how many years in every MBA forum that like differentiation is the key. That's really not the key. In fact, that works against you. Familiarity is the key. You want to be familiar first and then a little bit unique. If you're unfamiliar, you're too different. People won't adopt your idea. They won't adopt your product. And that's the antithesis of what's being taught in universities for decades now and still today. Yeah. And I thought anytime you see someone who's got, no, this has been dogma, but it's not dogma anymore. You got to really rethink this. And it's not a new idea. But sometimes it takes academia like a really long time to retool and readjust. And I think this is one of those cases that we need to make sure that we adjust faster because dogmas get entrenched. People's careers are built around them. 100%. And that can be dangerous.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. You'd mentioned the political or geopolitical strategist. There's another gentleman, Ian Bremmer, who's just really interesting to listen to. I listened to him with Scott Galloway a week ago, and I listened to him with the folks from TED. And it's just amazing his mind, how he will take you on a tour of the world and you can name a country and he'll tell you what's going on and where they stand in the larger context and the options they have available to them. I mean, he's playing global. That's not even 4-dimensional chess. I don't know what that's called even.
Yeah, I saw him interviewed on a different podcast and it was just like, oh, this guy, yes, more. And I think that's the sad state of affairs today is for me to listen to you and to even make a statement like I listened to this person on this podcast, like, well, I don't like this guy because I know the way he thinks. No, I don't agree with everyone I listen to, but I enjoy listening to people who think well. It's a respectful argument. I played sports through most of my life and played a little bit in my later days in club sports in college. You don't have to hate the people you're playing against. You can have such a healthy respect for the person you're playing against. You don't have to agree with them. But the reality is like, listen, that was a good game. And I'm glad that you played us tough. And I may even be glad you beat us because you brought out my best in that game. And so somebody who thinks well is someone we should applaud. We don't have to agree with them. We just have to say, let's be around people who think well, because when you're not, you're probably not thinking well either.
And it helps you understand the other side. It helps you understand the other arguments or different factions of the argument, different perspectives of the argument. I couldn't
100%.
agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. And yeah, just it's a fascinating context and landscape. And I listened to Huberman with Morgan Housel the other day, and that was a fascinating conversation, right? Psychology of money. So good. So good. And again, I don't agree with everything Huberman stands for, or of course there's imperfections out there in the media that I don't know where that stands. But, or Lex Friedman, people were inflamed that he had Donald Trump on. Lex Friedman, some of his podcast episodes have been some of my favorite 3 hours of listening ever on a podcast when he's talking to a scientist about Planet Nine. And I'm just enthralled and amazed at the conversation. So yeah, it's interesting. And something I'm working on is how do I consume and get my information, but be informed, but not inflamed? And so it's interesting that Peter Diamandis, futurist, he says, your mind is a neural net. Be careful what you train it on. That's it. I took that to heart. I was like, yeah, what am I exposing my mind to? And how do I stay informed so that I'm not misinformed, but not subject myself to a lot of the noise that's out there?
Yeah. Once again, gets back to balance. I think topic we've been talking about for years is diversity. I think we've got all our metrics of diversity wrong. I want diversity of how you think. That's what I want. I want diversity of the mind. Now, maybe your experiences and your cultural heritage shape how you think. That's great. But at the end of the day, I really care about your perspective. I don't care about the other stuff. I'd like to be, as Dr. King suggested, colorblind. I want to be blind to all that. I'm more curious about how you think and why you think that way. And if you think well, and those are the things I think that matter. And so if we don't have a diversity of information feeding our brain, it's eating a diet that is just all meat or all kale or all this or all that. Probably not the healthiest.
Yeah, definitely a dimension when we talk about diversity. Rarely do people's minds go to diversity of thought, diversity of background, degree, experience. And I think all of those are dimensions that are incredibly valuable in that conversation, because if we're working a problem, as many eyes as possible on some of these four-dimensional challenges, some of these complex adaptive challenges, we need those different minds looking at it from very different perspectives to help us chart a path forward, because no one has the answer. That doesn't exist, right? Mm-hmm. Sir, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for the incredible work that you do. And you're on episode what?
I think we're pretty close to, I think 450 right now or something like that. Gosh. And I think we've got you scheduled to come on an episode. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. You'll probably be close to 500 somewhere in there. I don't know. We'll see.
The Leadership Podcast, everybody. I'll put a lot of links in the show notes. Take care. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate your time today. Be well. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Scott. Take care.
I love the fact that Jim and his partner have been working on their podcast for just years at this point. Been very successful, systematized his learning and satiating his curiosity. Leaders are learners, and this is an individual who is learning always, becoming a better version of self. That's the practical wisdom for me. Are you always becoming a better version of self? As always, everyone, thank you so much for checking in. Take care. Be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.